90,000, it makes almost no difference at all. It's merely a gesture, isn't it?
I think part of what we're hearing about here is a kind of trying to prime a market, which will bring the price of this technology down. And that's what we've seen with many technologies in the past, is that once you start making them, once you start building up a manufacturing industry, the price will come down. You're quite right that a few tens of thousands is a relatively small part of the problem. But it is a problem. I don't think we can dismiss climate change anymore and recognise it needs to be done. And this is one string. I think what worries me about it is when we start talking as if there were silver bullets here. There aren't. There's a whole range of things we're going to have to do. You've mentioned the good news on nuclear. There are many other things that we need to do. So there's no single answer, but a whole lot of things making a contribution could well get us there.
But is it true that heat pumps use a lot more electricity? Because if that's true, it becomes almost a little bit self-defeating, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, a heat pump is in effect a fridge working in reverse. There's a thing called the second law of thermodynamics that tells us that heat doesn't flow from cold areas to hot areas spontaneously. You've got to put some energy in. And with heat pumps, the best ones, you're probably getting out about 5 times as much energy as you put in. So it takes a certain amount of energy to force the heat from the cold into the warm. But then once you've done that, you are getting a very significant net benefit. Now, in terms of, and the other benefit is that you can make electricity with low carbon sources such as nuclear and some of the renewables, whereas with gas, we're pretty much, for the foreseeable future, stuck with fossil gas. There are other options, but they're a long, long way into the future.
And the reliance on wind energy. I mean, you know, Johnson was saying today, again, that we're going to be the Saudi Arabia of wind. He wants to quadruple the number of offshore wind farms in this country. But we saw, didn't we, for that period of several weeks back in early September when the wind just did not blow in a substantial way. And my big worry is the over-reliance on wind means we get to February, a great big anticyclone sits over the UK for a couple of weeks, you know, and we get fog and frost and no wind, and we literally could find ourselves with the lights going out. What is this obsession with wind energy subsidised on the bills of businesses and ordinary households? Doesn't it need a rethink?
You can certainly manage a certain degree of wind on the system because any source of energy goes up and down, even nuclear, which is very reliable. You have to maintain the plants from time to time. You have to take them offline. The question with wind, it's actually not just when the wind isn't blowing. As you get more and more wind onto the system, you start getting a problem when they're all working at the same time, because that can flood the system. Yeah, it can flood the system with power and start, in the worst case, melting the wires, but certainly cause problems for electronic equipment. And also, when you're going from one state to the other, you have problems with trying to manage the system that can bring other alternative energy on and off. So unless we get storage on a level which is just pretty much inconceivable at the moment, and of course brings enormous needs for mineral mining, very significant environmental challenges of its own, then there's going to be a limit to what wind can provide. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be using wind at all. And indeed, offshore wind is more reliable than onshore wind. The winds tend to blow more steadily. Onshore, we've got the land getting in the way, and that tends to affect the speed of the wind. So good offshore wind now is around sort of 40-45% reliable. Now, that's still well below gas or nuclear or the reliable one, but it's a significant improvement from where we were. And I go back to the point, there's no silver bullet within this. There is a range of things which are needed. There are many times when we do see wind providing half our electricity and our carbon figures look very good, and we shouldn't lose that. But we need to recognise that there are other times when we need backup which can take over.
No, well, I remain somewhat sceptical about wind, but I'm pro-nuclear. I understand what you say. There is no silver bullet. But finally, can I ask you, are you pleased that Boris Johnson has turned the Conservative Party into the Green Party?
I'm studiedly neutral on the politics, I hope you mind. I think it's very important for us in the academic community to be so. Personally, I believe that climate change is an issue that we need to manage. I don't think necessarily it's species ending, as some of the more extreme claims are, but it is nonetheless the potential. And we should bear in mind the cost of not doing anything about it. If it leads to, for example, those big floods we had here in London not so very long ago, if we're going to have to build a higher tidal barrage because of higher sea level, which looks very likely. There are some enormous costs if salt water starts coming into our freshwater areas and starts destroying our agriculture. The costs of not doing anything about this are pretty horrendous as well. And I think...
Malcolm, we're producing 1% of global CO2. China's producing 28%, and that figure's going up with every single year that passes. And they're not even going to attend COP26. Don't we need to get some sense of perspective here?
Oh, I agree, but it is a matter of us doing our best. We're actually in the rank of countries which have already emitted as much of the carbon as we'd be allowed to if everybody on the planet had the same allocation. We're second only to the United States within that. And from that point of view, we do have... yes, that's right, if you take this, because we, of course, were first into the Industrial Revolution.
Well,
and so I mean, I'm not putting this forward as a rigorous scientific thing, but just as a general feeling. I think many people will feel that the countries like the UK and the US particularly, as China's living standards are still very long way behind ours for most of rural China. Urban China is very different. I think if we're in a position of being seen to be preaching to the rest of the world and not being prepared to do our own bit with it, then I think that will be unfortunate. But equivalently, you're quite right. A lot of this has to be levering in the enormous developing economies, and China and India are the two obvious ones, and working closely with them. China's nuclear record, incidentally, is quite extraordinary, the rate at which they're putting nuclear plants in. I think they have a real lesson to teach the rest of the world there. We should be open to that as long as we can manage the political difficulty. But I think it is genuinely a world issue, and I do think the UK should be playing its part. And the Prime Minister, whatever you say about the Prime Minister, he's a great salesman. I rather enjoyed listening to him.
He's going to be, the great salesman at COP26. It's just that China won't be there. Malcolm Grimston, thank you very much indeed for joining us and giving us your perspective on this debate.